Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This week's episode is coming to you from Wyoming once again. It's been a bit chilly so far, but nothing like my last trip up here. At least not yet, because old man winter is still hanging around. It is definitely not like what my younger brother and childhood friends have been experiencing up in central New York either, though. Those folks up there got hammered with snowfall this past week. Better them than me. Not much of a personal update this week, folks, but I do want to let the audience or thank the audience for the wonderful reception of last week's guest on the program. That talk went a bit long for a single episode, but not quite long enough to put it into two episodes. That will not be the case for this week's and next week's show. It will also not be the case for the following 2 weeks as I engage in a discussion about all things GOP politics in addition to other topics with another guest. Before I get too deep into introducing my guest this week, I have a question for the audience. Are you tired of the winning yet? I'm not. What I'm referring to here are some recent personnel actions within the Department of Defense. Many of you have heard this already, but for those of you that haven't, President Trump and Secretary of Defense Hegseth have essentially given the command, "You're fired," to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Chief of Naval Operations, among others. Now, there are many of my former colleagues in the Navy and across the Defense Department that are big mad about this and are trying to allude to the fact that these two, and a few others, were fired because of either their gender or the melanin content of their skin. Well, that's because that is how their worldview shapes them. Several of them stated in social media posts that if I support this, then go ahead and unfriend or unfollow them. Well, your wish has been granted. It is precisely why these senior leaders were selected for the position that resulted in them being let go. They were put in those positions by the previous administration based upon those factors, and not the reason for having a military in the first place. I know I have said this many times before, both in public and private conversations, as well as on this show. The most basic reason for having a military is this: lethality. The military's function is to kill the enemy and break their stuff, to be lethal in removing your adversary's capability to wage war on us. Nothing more, nothing less. If you are selected for a position based upon your support of the current thing, that means you are not focused on lethality. The current thing isn't your primary focus, so lethality becomes secondary, tertiary, or even worse. That degrades the basic function of the military. So again, if you are big mad about the firings, you were part of the problem as well. Your focus wasn't on lethality either, just the current thing. You don't have to agree with me, that's fine. But if you want to defend the worldview that the military should not have lethality as its primary and sole focus, then I will oblige your wishes. Enough on that, though. For this week and next, I am extremely delighted to have Mrs. Tiffany Boyd on the program for a two-part interview. Mrs. Boyd founded the Free Your Children organization in 2020 because she is dedicated to sharing the truth in love about education and equipping parents to assume the biblical mandate of disciplining and teaching their own children. Even though Free Your Children is a nationwide organization, she is home-based right here in the Volunteer State. She holds a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies from MTSU. She's a former tenured public school teacher, homeschool consultant, speaker, and homeschool advocate. As I mentioned just a bit ago, she is the founder and administrator of Free Your Children, LLC, and the Free Your Children radio show, which has a worldwide audience reaching millions of people weekly. In this week's episode, we talk all things school voucher scheme here in Tennessee, as well as around the Republic. But more importantly, we talk about what needs to happen going into the future. Just like last week's episode, right after the podcast intro, we're going to dive right into the interview. So with that, Let's all take a stand in the arena with Tiffany Boyd this week, folks, and get on with the show.
Welcome to Liberty Leadership and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil.
All right, podcast listeners. Today we have a special guest, Miss Tiffany Boyd. She's the founder of Free Your Children here, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then we're going to go into some questions that are going to focus on what's happening in the Tennessee General Assembly and her work here in the state. So, Tiffany, go ahead, take it away.
Well, thank you so much for having me on as a guest. It is my pleasure to be here today and to get to connect with your followers. I guess I can start by saying that I founded Free Your Children. I won't say by accident, but if someone had told me years ago that this is what I was going to be doing, I would have told them that they were crazy. I originally started out as, well, first I was a former tenured public school teacher. And when we had our third child, my husband made the decision that we were going to start homeschooling. And I kind of entered into that arena with all the misconceptions that a lot of people have about homeschooling. And back then it was even more, because this was before it kind of became catchy or trendy, I should say. So this is our 21st year. We're over halfway through our 21st year of homeschooling. So back, and I'm dating myself here, I know, but when we started homeschooling, the internet wasn't the beast that it is today. It was just starting out. And so finding other homeschool families in the state of Tennessee was sort of like finding a needle in a haystack. So it was really uncharted territory. And because I had been indoctrinated into believing that education was supposed to look like what it looks like in the government institution of public school, I really had to go through a deschooling process for myself and then for our older two children who had always gone to public school. So it was quite the journey when we started out. And then quickly, and we were weirdos back then. We were people who were not following the norm. It wasn't popular in general, but it really wasn't popular in our area because we live in a really small area of Tennessee. And there were not very many people homeschooling, and there certainly weren't many teachers homeschooling at that time. So there were many, many people who weren't in favor of our decision to start this journey. But we kept trudging forward, and we learned to do a lot of research about it. And I really started connecting with individuals who really had a idea about education that I wanted to make sure that our family was getting to experience. So I had to unlearn everything that I thought I knew about education. And then once I did that, it made the homeschool journey much more pleasurable for all of us. And it really opened up a whole new world. So through that process, other people were starting to see that the public school system was definitely not fulfilling their needs as a family. And so they were trying to navigate out. They didn't know where to start because, again, back then, all we really had was the internet. And that was only if you lived in an area where you could get internet. And so they would contact me for help on how to navigate out of the public school system. So I really started out doing that, helping parents navigate into the homeschooling world. And then it grew into creating a homeschool support group for Middle Tennessee. It grew. We were serving, I believe, around 1,000 families when I left that capacity because we had outgrown that because of COVID. So during COVID, that homeschool group that I had started, and I was teaching co-op classes, which are, if you're not in the homeschooling world and you don't know what that is, a homeschool co-op is where a group of parents get together and they teach classes for free to other homeschool families, as a group in the community. And we were offering those services with the homeschool support group that I was running at the time. Oh gosh, we did that for like 19 years. Field trips, classes, all kinds of things. And then throughout that process, we were seeing the climate, the educational climate in the state of Tennessee decline rapidly through legislation that was being passed and issues that were popping up. So then we started getting really, really engaged in the legislative process and teaching our families, why they needed to be engaged and what they needed to watch for. We were taking the kids to the Capitol to speak to their legislators about bills that happened to be running that legislative session that we were watching and concerned with. And so then, COVID happened, and I think our homeschool support group grew around 246%. It just exploded with growth because parents, obviously, the schools were closing, that their children were sent home, and they were sent home with the schoolwork from the public school. And the parents quickly realized, if I'm going to have to do this at home, I would rather do it the way I choose to do it with the curriculum that I choose to use instead of having to just basically do public school at home. So a lot of them left and they didn't go back. They remained in the homeschooling world. And so we had just experienced a phenomenal growth. And then if you're in Tennessee, the homeschool well-being child check initiative that Penny Schwinn intended to implement had really hit the scene in Tennessee. And so then we got really, really engaged in, we need to be watching more carefully what's really going on because there's a bigger agenda behind this. So that really launched Free Your Children. And so I've been doing that in that capacity full time, since more than full time. This has basically consumed my life. And so it's not a bad thing. We're still homeschooling our younger two children. And so even though Free Your Children takes up a lot of our time, we know that it's necessary in order to be able to preserve the freedoms that we have. And hopefully we will have more freedoms soon in Tennessee. But I know that it's a necessary thing that needs to be done in order to make sure that my children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren can continue to be able to be on the last frontier of freedom, which is homeschooling. So again, even though it takes a lot of time and energy and money to do this, we really believe that it's worth every bit of it because we know that homeschooling is the target. Right now, that's really the only area that they really don't have control of. And so we're fighting hard to try to maintain that control, maintain that freedom so that they don't have total control of us and expand that freedom actually here in the state of Tennessee.
Absolutely. And as many of my listeners know, it's my belief, my core belief that it will be homeschooling and homeschooled children that can save the republic. The public education system is rotten to the core, and there is no saving it in its current iteration. It can't be.
I agree. And I think that a lot of people will say we need to fix the system. And I have long said it's not broken. It was never broken. It's running as effectively as they intended it to. It's doing exactly what they intended for it to do. So it's not broken. And I think that once people accept that fact, I think it makes it easier for them to recognize that what's going on is actually part of the plan and has been.
Absolutely. I've read many stories and many articles. It's really driven right now in modern times through the United Nations. UNESCO.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's their whole goal, is to make private education public through, the catchphrase of school choice, which is anything but.
Right. And, I see these, and we recently had the Education Freedom Act, which is a misnomer, passed in Tennessee, where it says, hey, we're going to provide parents a choice, which they already had. What they need to do is they want to provide parents the means. And I see the opposition, and I was talking about this with Nikki a couple of weeks ago, the opposition from the Democrats and the teachers to this. And I don't understand that because it's really a de facto takeover of the private education system.
Yes.
So it's just going to make the private education an extension of public, maintaining government control.
Yes.
It's something the Democrats and the teachers should applaud.
Yeah, it's funny. I say it's part of the Hegelian dialect that they've been implementing, for a long time, where they pit one side against the other, but really they're all marching toward the same agenda, essentially. And I think that most people don't realize that. If you look at the history of school choice, a lot of Democrats who haven't necessarily researched, where this came from, what they need to understand that there were just as many Democrats pushing school choice as there were Republicans. It's a machine that works together, and then they use all these distractions to get people, embroiled in all of these arguments off to the side where they can collectively march forward and implement, this global takeover of education, which is exactly, their intentions. And you're right. Once they can control private education and all forms of education are government controlled, then they have the ability to control everyone. And it really concerns me that I think, especially within the homeschool community, because we're dealing with this a little bit with, across the nation, I know they're dealing with it, but Tennessee, I think, is one of the hardest states to try to get people mobilized. First off, and I know you and I were talking about this earlier, you said that you moved to Tennessee because you thought it was a free state. I think a lot of people move to Tennessee because they think it's a free state, and then they get here and they're like, "Whoa, what is this? This isn't what we were told. We thought it was conservative and we were going to have all these freedoms." And I think largely for the homeschool community as a whole, they think they're protected because they're homeschooling and that none of these agendas are touching them. And so sometimes it's hard to get them motivated and get them to show up, and they won't show up often until their freedoms they feel like are actually threatened. And so, we're trying to encourage homeschoolers across the nation. You're one legislative session away from losing your freedoms. One. That's it. And every legislative session, they do things incrementally to erode those freedoms with all of these bills that they're running through the respective legislatures all across, the United States. And most people aren't watching because, again, if they've already left the public school system, they think, well, none of this affects me. We're over here raising our chickens, baking our bread, doing our homestead. So we're protected. No one's going to come and take my kids away and put them in public school or control what we're teaching. And they could not be any more wrong. Right now, we were just a couple of days ago looking through all of the bills in the legislature, and there are tons of bills that threaten parental rights, educational rights, and constitutional rights in the state of Tennessee right now that everyone should be up in arms about. And you see very few people even addressing them because people aren't aware and they're not doing their research and they're not getting engaged. So I think homeschoolers need to understand, and private school parents too, but specifically homeschoolers, you are the target. They are going to come after you and you have to be prepared. And so I encourage all homeschoolers, not only the ones in Tennessee, but everywhere, don't be reactive, be proactive and get involved and, make sure that you're watching bills that are coming through the legislature. You're speaking up, you're showing up, and you're getting actively engaged because they really don't like to see a whole bunch of homeschool parents come to the Capitol. They really don't like that.
They don't like to see their constituents show up there at all for any reason.
Correct. You're exactly right. Because largely, most don't. The largest presence at our legislature in Tennessee, and of course, Free Your Children is nationwide. So I'm connected, to other people who do exactly what we do all across the United States. And one of the reasons why we founded Free Your Children was to bring all of those advocates together so that we would have a stronger voice. And so we've been able to do that. And that's been fantastic. That's how I know Nikki that you spoke about, Nikki Truesdale. And I think that, what people need to understand and listening to them talk, about their states is the largest presence that you're going to see in the legislature. It's not the constituents, it's the lobbyists. And it's the lobbyists with the most money who are there day after day, all the time, really keeping a thumb on those legislators to make sure whatever bill it is they're running passes through. And they make it as difficult as possible for the average constituent to be able to make the trip, to the Capitol to follow bills through committee. And it's inconvenient. Most normal people have to work. And so it requires them to take off from work. But I really encourage your listeners and your viewers to make that a priority, especially even if it's just one bill. If it's only one bill that you can track, make it a priority to stay engaged, make phone calls, call your legislators, show up when bills are in committee, send emails, try to schedule private meetings closer to your home, maybe on a day that isn't when necessarily they're at their office at the Capitol, but, meet them at a local coffee shop or something if you have concerns that you want to talk to them about. But I think that they have really gotten very comfortable about being able to do whatever they want to do because there's very little pushback from the general public.
Absolutely. And I discuss this frequently for the last 4 years on the show. It's apathy.
Yes.
And legislators, newly elected or long-term elected, along with the lobbyists, they count on the apathy of the
Absolutely.
electorate. Our founding fathers gave us a system of self-governance that required us to be active participants, or your freedoms get eroded little by little unless you are there talking to them.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that, most people think that their civic engagement stops when they go to the voting booth and they just, push a button or fill in a bubble with the right letter behind the name. But I think that what people need to understand is those letters are very deceiving behind the name. So I always encourage people, do your research on the candidates that you're voting for. Look at their voting record, see who is contributing to their campaign fund, follow the money. It's really necessary. You're right. People need to understand what civic engagement is and what our responsibilities are as citizens of a constitutional republic. And if you like living in a constitutional republic, you may want to make sure that you're exercising your rights and you're, fulfilling your obligations as a citizen, or less we lose it.
Right. Voting is the last item in your responsibility. Your daily, or even if it's just weekly, active engagement with those people that are sent to represent you. I mean, our Constitution gives us the authority, the citizens. It doesn't give it, it's built in because all power rests with the people. It gives us the right to direct their activities, to instruct them. It's the remonstrance part of our Constitution in Tennessee.
Yeah, it's scary too. I don't know what your opinion is on this, but to see that many of our elected officials, they do not see it as, or at least this is my perception, because we've spent a lot of time now at the Capitol and in meetings with legislators, is that we get an undertone, or I should just say, not even an undertone anymore. It's pretty blatant. They do not feel like they work for us. They feel like they are in control and we should do, whatever they say, and we should be fine with whatever decision it is that they're making. And we shouldn't ask questions. Is that, kind of your opinion of what you see going on in Tennessee?
Absolutely. I call them the new aristocracy, or it's the ruling class. And our apathy set that up. If you look at the primary seasons in Tennessee, a lot of people don't realize it, but the primary is in fact the general election for most of our counties. Or most of our legislative districts. If you don't vote in the primary, whoever wins that primary is going to win the general, no matter what.
Right.
It's de facto. And, I told you that I ran in the last primary when I ran as a Republican, the 6% of the registered voters showed up. 6.
Yeah, I know. It's scary. And I often, I look at all this, we've looked at it, and I'm curious as to what they think our state is going to look like if we keep up with this trajectory. Because this last legislative session, we were there during the special session. We actually went up, stayed in Nashville, attended the special session, got our little tickets that you had to have, which was ludicrous to even be able to enter the people's house. You had to have a ticket, and then you had an assigned seat, when you went in. So we watched all of that circus. We were there last legislative session as well, fighting back, against school choice last session. And it was really interesting, just to watch all of this play out, and the fact that so many people were angry that their elected official did not listen to their constituent, overwhelmingly, they were not listening to their constituents. Who they were listening to were large lobbyists like Americans for Prosperity, American Federation for Children. That was really who was driving the machine last legislative session and during the special session as well. So, I think a lot of people are they feel like they have no voice. And as we watched the special session progress, I heard over and over again people that were there say, what is even the point of voting anymore? Because they're going to do exactly what they want to do, irregardless of what the people that elected them, are asking them to do.
And even the most conservative of the members were silenced by their own party
Correct.
on
Yes.
the floor.
Yep, absolutely.
Like, was it Jody Barrett, Todd Warner?
Todd Warner, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Monty Fritz.
Mm-hmm.
The true champions of conservative constitutional principles, not allowed to speak.
No.
That speaks volumes in itself.
Yes.
Who is actually controlling our state?
Yeah. And I think that voters need to remember this. And you're right. There's such a low voter turnout that, it makes it easy for the same names, to stay in power and get elected, over and over. And what is it they say? If you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to keep getting what you have.
Yes, Einstein's definition of insanity. If you keep doing
Yes.
the same things over and over and expecting different results, that's
Exactly.
insanity.
Exactly. And that is what we have resolved ourselves to, I think, in Tennessee, is that, people complain about it, but they're not doing anything to change it. And it's really scary watching. I really started pushing back. Penny Schwinn was one thing that had nothing to do with, well, it did, because our governor put her there, in that position. And I could go on and on about my opinion on that particular topic with him. But I think when the vote for TISA, the way that our educational system is funded, in the state of Tennessee, we had the old funding formula, which was known as the B. And they had a law or a bill that they were wanting to pass into law that would remove the old BEP and replace it with the TISA. And when we were looking through all of this years ago, we realized that doing that would allow them to usher in school choice in the state of Tennessee with far less accountability. So, we went up with a large group during that point in time and spoke to they were all Republican legislators that we met with, because, we're Christian conservatives. So that's supposed to be, I use air quotes on that, who's representing us. So we met with those legislators and asked them to vote no, on the removing the old BEP and putting, TISA in place. And we told them why. We took brochures explaining to them, about school choice and why it was a Trojan horse and why we were opposed to it, and the history behind school choice and how it would erode the private school freedoms and the homeschool freedoms. And I think that the majority of them looked at us as conspiracy theorists and crazy. And then, of course, they passed that law. They replaced the BEP with the TISA. And of course, that was really the one thing that they needed to happen in Tennessee to be able to usher all of this in. And we knew then, when we were talking to them, this is a huge problem. Number one, most people have no clue. They're just not educated and on the history of school choice, where it came from, what it is, why it's so nefarious. They just don't know. And then more don't want to know.
Right, because it's taken generations now to indoctrinate us in this free public school. And
yes.
And like I always say, if you get a free product, there's nothing free about public school. Free, what's the quality of anything you've received in your life of a free product?
Right.
It's poor quality. Even though you're forced to pay for this free product. Talk about second, third order effects of your return on investment. And that's why homeschooling is the largest return on investment, because you're getting a better educated child,
right,
that's better able to participate in a system of self-governance. That's why public schools don't like that. They don't.
Right.
The government doesn't like people that will participate in the self-governance of the country.
Exactly.
The country, when in charge of the education system, is going to teach the children about limitations on government, not a one.
Exactly. And, you're right. You're creating independent thinkers, self starters, all the things that the public school system was not created, to create, to pump out. Because if you're going to be, because let's face it, if you don't know the history of school choice, there are a lot of books that I'm sure both myself and Mr. Linton can recommend to you to read on that so that you will better understand what we're discussing if you're not familiar with it. But it was to create, I think it was Rockefeller that said it best. His goal was not to create a nation of thinkers. It was to create a nation of workers. They just wanted obedient workers to enter the workforce, do as they were told, not ask questions. Sounds familiar, right? That's exactly what happens in the public school system. Sit down, do your work, be quiet, don't ask questions. The bell rings, you get up, you go to your next class. And so they were conditioning all of these children, and they were great at it. That's why I say it's not a broken system. It's doing exactly what it was set up to do. And we see that, today in our culture is that most people get up, go to work, take their kids to daycare, drop them off in public school, whatever. When work is over and school is over, they come home, then they're running a million different places, athletics or clubs or whatever they're involved in. They have very little time one-on-one with their children, and then they go to bed and they get up the next day and they start it all over again. So our society has been so conditioned, generation after generation, that that's the norm. It's so hard for most families to think outside of the box.
Yes, because public education definitely does not create or enhance or even delve into critical thinking.
No.
I mean, especially here lately it's all standardized testing. You are taught, you're teaching children to a test.
Correct.
Not to think for themselves or think about why are they asking this question? That's definitely not it.
And now there's this huge trend across the U.S., and Tennessee is no different. It's happening here in Tennessee too. Most of the curriculum is digitized. So they're sitting in front of a device and the curriculum is created in real time, meaning they keep asking the students questions over and over again until they condition them to answer the way that they want them to answer. And then, of course, they're data mining the kids, and they're, collecting all this data. And of course, FERPA allows that data to be sold to the highest bidder in the name of educational research. They do not have to have parental consent to do it. FERPA allows that to happen. And if you look at the different apps that are running on these, digital curriculum platforms that they're owned, they all have FERPA disclaimers. So, once the parent, allows their child to use that digital curriculum, that's what's happening. And, I've seen a lot of it. I've had parents who, happen to be, I don't want to say lucky, unfortunate, it's probably a better way to term it. But if the kid had the Chromebook or whatever at home, due to inclement weather or the school was shut down for sickness or whatever, and some of the parents actually had an opportunity to sit and see what this curriculum included. And they screen recorded it and then sent it to me. And I've made some of that public, and as early as first grade. And it's embedded with all the social emotional learning, components that has become so popular because that's one of the largest ways that they're data mining the children. And of course, all that is doing is it is constantly attempting to change the thoughts, the attitudes, the beliefs, and the behaviors of the children from a young age, as soon as they're old enough, to go to school. And they're conditioning them to adopt all of these thoughts, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of the state, of the UN, of the things that the UN is saying makes the perfect global citizenry. So that is really what children are being subjected to in the public school system. And parents really need, and there's no such thing as a good public school. They're all the same, every single one of them. They're all doing the same things. So if you think just because you bought a great house in a wealthy neighborhood in the best school district that your children are immune from all of this, they're not. It's just a lie. And, unfortunately, a lot of the things that we're seeing come through our legislature are very to even a parent maintaining custody in their home, physical custody of their child. And again, they're watching. Here's an example of this. So I released some information about something called Mirror that is being implemented in Tennessee schools. So this is a mirror that either hangs on the wall or sits on the stand. And the kids, it's elementary school, and the children can come up and interact with this mirror. Well, the mirror uses facial recognition to pick up on if they think that something is wrong with that child or not, based on the way they respond to questions, based on the inflection in their voice or their facial expressions. And then they can alert someone at the school to the fact that this child may be at risk for X, Y, and Z. Well, now the schools have been loaded up with social workers, counselors. So then the professionals can come in and start, counseling or interviewing those children about what could potentially be happening that is making them seem like they need help or that there is a concern. So parents need to realize that, that this is part of the plan. And last legislative session, we really pushed back against the at-risk boarding charters in Tennessee. We did it the session before too, and people thought the bill went away. I knew that bill wasn't going away because that's part of the greater plan. Well, it came back last legislative session, and even some of the legislators who had previously been against it wound up voting for it. It flew through with bipartisan support. It passed. And now in Tennessee, we have literally, we are opening up at-risk boarding charters where these children are going to reside. They are going to live there all year long, and they can be sent there for a variety of reasons. Truancy, educational neglect. I mean, educational neglect can mean anything. So how are they finding these kids? They're finding them at school when they are identified as at risk, and then they can be recommended to live in these at-risk boarding charters. And the public is just largely unaware until their children wind up getting trapped up in truancy, and truancy is just a fraud. I mean, you can't miss any more than 5 days unexcused out of the 5 days out of the school year. And then, you wind up in the juvenile justice system, and then the judge is telling you we can send your kid away. Well, where do you think they're going to send them to? They're going to start sending them to these at-risk boarding charters, and those kids are worth upwards of $500 a day to the state.
Re-education camps is what they call them in the Soviet Union.
Yes, exactly. I'm like, do you not see anything similar here? They already have these. They're institutions, and they're looking to send your children, to these environments. So I think, and I usually make contact with the parents after it's already happened, after they've already been, hauled into court, or after their child has been accused of some ridiculous, because even on an allegation, this is happening all across the state of Tennessee too. Some child may go tell their teacher, little Johnny over there, said that he wants to kill me, or, something or another. And then just on an allegation, then that child winds up being taken from the parents, put into the juvenile justice system, or held. The parents don't even know where they are. They've handcuffed kids. They put them in the back of the police car. They've held them in solitary confinement. There are lawsuits right now pending in the state of Tennessee where this is all happening on an allegation. So it's really, it really shocks me, I think, at the lack of concern that most parents have in general when they read about these things. I think a lot of them think, well, it will never happen to me, until it does.
That's what everybody says. It'll never happen to me. Okay, folks, I'm going to break the discussion right here and bring you the remainder of it in next week's episode. If you would like more information, just visit the website of freeyourchildren.com and check it out. While there, you can sign up to receive Tiffany's newsletter so you can stay informed on this issue, which is vital to keeping our republic just that, a republic. This week's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from the book of Isaiah, chapter 54, verse 13. All your children shall be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. I know that I have repeatedly stated in the past that our system of public education is broken, but I believe Mrs. Boyd has stated it quite correctly. Public education is working exactly as designed, and part of that design is the inclusion of secular humanism and the exclusion of anything related to our Creator. For generations now, public schools are performing their task of creating mindless robots, unable to think critically, and that will follow government orders because government has replaced the Creator as the source of our rights. It has purposely failed to educate the people on the type of government our founding fathers created and the limits we, the people, imposed on government to secure for ourselves and our posterity the very freedoms they fought, bled, and often died for. Yes, folks, public schools are doing exactly what they were designed to do. And until each and every American wakes up and takes a stand to regain control of the very government that is supposed to work for us, not against us, it will continue to happen. Incrementally, as it has done for more than 40 years now, but it is picking up the pace with these school voucher schemes being forced down our throats by an unresponsive and uncaring government that was only elected by the apathy of the people. Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a stand in the arena together. Reveille, it's time to wake up.